When it comes to the crop Camelina, what is the right seeding depth and seeding rate? Welcome to a research review brought to you by the Northeast Agriculture Research Foundation. My name is David McTaggart and I work for NARF up in Melfort, Saskatchewan in the heart of the Carrot River Valley. And today we'll be going over a project that we conducted in 2022 that looked at various seeding depths and seeding rates for the crop Camelina to see how it had affected the crop's performance. Now, Camelina is an annual oilseed crop with both winter and spring annual types of varieties. Its use is mostly as a feed ingredient for pets, livestock, and aquaculture. And it is a part of the brassica family, similar to canola, and some of its benefits include its tolerance to frost and a moderate level of flea beetle pressure. However, Camelina is a very small seeded crop, which makes it susceptible to low emergence if seeded too deep. So in our experiment, we looked at different seeding rates and depths in comparison to what's currently recommended of 5 pounds per acre and no more than a 1/4 inch seeding depth. So in our experiment, what did we look at specifically? Well, we examined 2 different factors and how they interacted. The first was seeding depth, of which we had 3 levels. One was a 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, and 3/4 of an inch. And then the second factor we looked at was seeding rate, and that was 1 1/4 pounds of seed per acre, 2 1/2 pounds of seed per acre, 5 pounds of seed per acre, and also 7 1/2 pounds of seed per acre. And again, at that point of reference being the current recommended rate of 5 pounds of seed per acre and seeded at no more than a 1/4 inch depth. We used the Camelina variety Cypress, and across the growing season, we measured our plots for stand density, establishment uniformity, plant height, lodging, days to maturity, and yield. And now this experiment was conducted just south of the city of Melfort at the Melfort Research Farm and took place between May and September of 2022. So what did we learn from this experiment? Well, first off, a little details on our growing season. 2022 can be divided into 2 parts. So first off, we had a wet and cool spring, sort of May and June, and then a dry and hot July and August from there. We seeded our plots on the 27th of May using a Fabro plot seeder with knife type openers on 12-inch row spacing. And our plots received a standard fertility package based on recommendations for canola and a pre-burn herbicide application of glyphosate, and then an in-crop herbicide application for the control of grassy weeds using clethodim, or a group 1 herbicide. Now, when it comes to the effects of seeding depth, we saw that there were no significant differences between seeding depths for the various parameters that we measured. And this could be the result of some of the higher variability that we saw between our replications. However, we did see trends, and those trends told us that a shallower seeding depth leads to a denser, more uniform stand with, on average, higher yield, numerically speaking. And we saw that there was overall a comparable yield between a 1/4 inch depth and a 1/2 inch depth. Now, when it comes to the effects of seeding rate, we did see some significant differences between the different seeding rates. Overall, we saw that the higher seeding rates, that 5 pounds of seed per acre and 7 1/2 pounds of seed per acre, had a more uniform stand. And then also these higher seeding rates had taller plants than the lower seeding rates. However, this did not lead to a higher incidence of lodging during the 2022 growing season. Overall, we had virtually no lodging in our plots. And we did see a trend for there to be higher yields with that 1x, so that 5 pound seed per acre, or the 1.5x seeding rate of 7 1/2 pounds seed per acre when we compared it to those 2 other low seeding rates. And when it came to the interaction between seeding depth and seeding rate, we saw that at the 1/4 inch depth, when you increase that seeding rate from that 1 1/4 pounds or 2.5 pounds up to 5 pounds or 7.5 pounds, the plots did mature earlier. We did see a trend for that, but no significant differences. And other factors to keep in mind were the importance of a good pre-seed herbicide application, because Camelina is limited in its control of broadleaf weeds that you have once you get into the growing season. So it's very important for that pre-seed herbicide application. And then just for reference, across our whole plot area or our whole trial area, Camelina took about 89 days to mature in 2022. So now that we've explored the yield differences based on seeding depth and seeding rate, let's compare the seeding rates for how the change in cost is relative to the change in revenue from yield. And to do this, I'll be using what I'm going to call the revenue change relative to the control. And that is the difference between the change in revenue of the treatment relative to that recommended 5 pounds an acre seeding rate and the change in cost due to seed compared to that 5 pounds an acre recommended rate. The cost of seed that we used was $5.50 per pound, and the contracted price of Camelina we used was $15 per bushel, or about 30 cents per pound. And so if we compare those three other seeding rates of 1 1/4 pounds per acre, 2.5 pounds per acre, and 7.5 pounds per acre relative to our control at 5 pounds an acre, we see that there was only ever a positive value, so a higher increase in revenue relative to the change in seed cost for seeding at the high rate of 7.5 pounds per acre. But you can see still it's relatively marginal. So what can we take away from this presentation? Well, when it comes to the seeding depth of Camelina, from this 1-year demonstration and previous work we've done with Camelina here at NARF, we saw that a shallow seeding depth of 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch offered the best yield performance. And when it comes to putting Camelina down with a full-sized air seeder, that might vary in depth across the width of the drill, depending on the landscape. It might be better to err on the side of caution and seed shallow to avoid putting the Camelina down too deep, because we saw in this demonstration, if once we hit that 3/4 inch depth, we did see yield start to drop off. And then when it comes to seeding rate, we saw that the current recommended rate of that 5 pounds of seed per acre offered similar performance to that high seeding rate of 7.5 pounds of seed per acre. And so we could probably generally stick with what is recommended on that front. And then when we interact those two factors together of having the shallow seeding depth of 1/4 to 1/2 inch with a 1x or a 1.5x seeding rate, we saw that we can generally hasten maturity when we compare it to a lighter seeding rate and a deeper seeding depth. So that's all we have for today, folks. Thank you very much for tuning in, and hope to see you next time.